When I first saw the dark shape in the headlights, my breath caught, because I understood this was not a coincidence. A bear stood in the middle of the road, tall on its hind legs, right on the faded yellow line, as if it had been waiting for us. The night air was cold through the cracked window. The motor hummed under my hands. I expected the animal to bolt for the trees and vanish, the way wild things do. I even said it out loud. I thought that would be the end of it. But nature had a different surprise. The bear did not move. It did not huff. It did not slap the pavement or lunge. It simply looked at us. I felt the look as a weight and as a pull. The eyes were not glassy or wild. They were steady, dark, and awake. My sister whispered my name. My friend told me to stay inside the car. I could hear the small clink of the turn signal I had forgotten to switch off, blinking into the empty night. The sound felt ridiculous and loud, like a mistake in a quiet church. The bear lowered to all fours with a slow, deliberate motion, and then rose again. It turned its head toward the trees to our right, then back to me, then to the trees again. It was not guessing, it was showing. I felt the skin on my arms tighten. I did not feel hunted. I felt called. The bear took a short step toward the shoulder, then stopped and looked back. I felt the soft tremor of the engine through the steering wheel, and, without thinking, I clicked it off. The sudden silence made my heart sound larger inside my chest. We all froze at the same time. I could hear my own breathing, and it sounded too loud. The bear's ears twitched. For a breath I thought it would charge, because that is what fear tells you. Instead, it did something I have never seen. It dipped its head, almost like a nod, and waited. I could taste metal on my tongue. My hands were shaking, and also very calm. Both feelings were true at once. I knew I should be afraid, and I was. But under the fear there was another feeling I did not know how to name. I opened the door. The dome light came on, weak and yellow. The bear did not flinch. I stepped out, keeping the door between us, and the cold hit my legs and the smell of pine came hard and clean. My friend cursed under his breath. My sister told me to sit back down. The bear shifted its weight and made a short, low sound that was not a growl. It was more like a throat note, a pressed breath. It waited for me to choose. I felt that down in my bones. It waited for me to choose. He looked at me like I was his own. I do not know how else to say it. Not like a pet, not like a threat, like someone he recognized. The words feel wrong, but the feeling was exact. The bear took 3 slow steps toward the shoulder, paused, and glanced over his shoulder in that same backward look you see in a person when they want you to come along. I could not believe what I was seeing, and yet my body believed before my mind did. I stepped out from the shelter of the door. Gravel crunched under my shoes, loud in the stillness. The bear moved again, not rushing, not hiding. He was careful and visible. He reached the edge of the road and stood there with one paw lifted and his chest turned toward the forest, then toward us. I heard a nightbird call once, and then stop. The trees were dark and close. I knew every rule said, do not follow. Every part of my life said, stay inside, drive away, be sensible, be safe. But the bear kept waiting, and something opened in me, like a window that had been stuck for years, and finally slid free. I looked back through the windshield and saw my own face reflected there, pale and strange. My sister's eyes were wet. She shook her head, but she did not say another word. My friend cracked his door and muttered that I was insane, and then he was out too, because fear and curiosity travel together like brothers. The 3 of us stood in a line with the car behind us and the bear in front of us and nothing else in the whole world. The air smelled like damp earth and old needles. The road stretched empty in both directions, holding its breath. The bear turned and padded along the shoulder, parallel to the road, close enough that I could see where the fur lay thick and where it clumped with mud. He moved with a quiet patience that felt older than the road and older than my judgment. He would go a few yards, stop, look back to be sure we were with him, then go again. He was not leading us like a guide on a trail. He was checking our courage the way you check a pulse. I felt both tested and protected, and the two feelings shook me more than any noise would have. I took another step, then another. Each step felt like a promise and a mistake at the same time. It is hard to explain how the mind keeps two truths at once. I knew this was a wild animal who owed me nothing. I also knew in the same breath that he wanted something from us. The bear stopped again and faced me head-on, soft shoulders squared, breath fogging lightly in the beam of our headlights. The engine was off, but the lights were still on, and the bear's breath turned silver in that cold light. He held me there with his eyes. My throat tightened. I nodded without meaning to. I think I nodded back. I thought he would turn and vanish into the trees, and we would sit in the car telling ourselves we had imagined everything. I thought I would start the engine and find a radio station and make a joke and drive on and let the night close over this moment like water over a stone. I thought it was finished, but the bear stepped off the gravel and into the dark, looked back once more, and I understood that he was not leaving us at all. He was asking us to follow, and before I could stop myself, I did. We followed at a distance that felt both safe and wrong. The trees closed in. The shoulder thinned to damp earth and needles. The bear moved like a shadow that had weight. He went a few paces, stopped, and listened. He turned his head just enough to see if we were still there. I thought he would vanish into the thicket and leave us with our pounding hearts and a story to soften later, but he turned back again. I heard my friend's shoes slide on wet gravel. I heard my sister whisper my name like a warning and a prayer. The bear kept pausing as if measuring us. He would step forward, place each paw with care, then halt and hold still so long that I could hear his breath. I could hear mine trip over itself. I felt the wrong courage that comes when fear grows tired. I also felt a trust I could not defend with reason. Both feelings lived in me at once, and that was the strangest part. Branches brushed my sleeves. Sap smelled sharp and sweet. Somewhere in the dark, a jay screamed and then swallowed its voice. The bear lifted his nose into a faint breeze and drifted a little to the left, away from the road light, into a corridor of darker trees. He did not slink. He did not hide. He moved where we could almost see him, and then he waited, like a teacher who wants you to find the answer yourself. He looked at me like I was his own, and the words made no sense, even as they fit exactly. He stopped beside a fallen trunk that lay like a barrier across the path. He tested it with one paw and stepped cleanly over, then turned to watch us with a steady face. My friend muttered that we should go back. My sister touched my sleeve and said nothing. I put my hand on the cold bark and swung my leg over, and for a second my foot snagged and I pitched forward. The bear lifted his head at the sound, but he did not move to flee, and he did not move to threaten. I stood and we all breathed again. We went a little farther. The ground dipped. Water whispered somewhere unseen. The bear veered toward it and stood with his front paws on a slick stone. He looked into the dark as if he could see through it. He glanced back to mark us, and I felt counted, like he was taking attendance. I felt small and also chosen, and that tugged tears up behind my eyes in a way I could not control. I blinked them away because the world here was already blurred enough. He moved again and crossed a shallow trickle. His feet made almost no sound. I stepped where he stepped and felt the cold soak through my shoe. The breath left me, not from pain, but from the plainness of following a wild thing on its own terms. He chose a route that was just barely possible for us, never easy, never cruel. He would go, stop, look back, and wait. When we caught up, he would go again, as if he needed to keep us inside some invisible line. I kept expecting a rush, a snap, some flinch that would remind me what he was. Instead, the night seemed to settle around us in a deeper way. A branch cracked to our right. My chest clenched. The bear turned his head toward the sound and made a low, breathy huff that did not carry far, almost a whisper shaped in a body too large for whispers. The hush that followed felt deliberate. He had said something to the dark, and the dark had listened. I was sure now that any second he would lose interest and melt into the brush, and we would stand blinking in the sudden emptiness and talk ourselves back to the car. I said it again inside my head to make it true. I was sure of it. But he turned back again and held my eyes, and I could not keep the old story anymore. He wanted us with him. I do not know how I know that. I only know the knowing. He led us along a narrow bench where the ground held firm. He passed under a leaning birch and brushed it with his shoulder, and it shed a little snow of dry flakes and dust. He paused to sniff a patch of earth that looked like nothing to me. He circled it once, then lifted his face and searched ours, as if asking whether we noticed what he noticed. I felt clumsy and blind and honored all at the same time. I nodded like a fool. He could not possibly read that, and yet he moved on. My legs shook. My hands were cold and hot. I wanted to turn back, and I wanted never to stop. He would go. He would stop. He would check, and each time my heart rose and fell like a small animal in a net. When he stopped for longer than before, I thought the test was over and that he would finally slip away and close the door behind him. I was ready to let relief pour through me and wash the ache from my chest. But he looked over his shoulder and waited for me to take one more step, and then another, and the next, as if the real thing we had come for was still a little farther inside the dark. The bear led us onto a path I had never noticed in all the years I had driven that road. It was not a trail so much as a thin seam through the ferns, a place where the ground remembered footsteps. He found it without searching, like he had walked it 100 times. I thought it would fade after a few yards and leave us standing in brush, but it held. I told myself the path would end soon and he would be gone. I thought that would be the end. But the trees opened just enough for us to keep going. He set the pace. He would move for a handful of breaths, then stop and angle his head to listen. My sister kept a hand on my sleeve. My friend muttered about how crazy this was, and yet kept moving anyway. The bear checked us with those backward glances that felt almost human. He looked at me like I was his own, and the feeling knocked something loose inside me that I could not name. That was when we heard it. At first it sounded like water under stones, then like a person trying not to cry. The sound came and went, thin and low, a wet note that made the hair rise on my arms. The bear froze so hard the air seemed to freeze with him. His ears lifted and turned. He swung his head toward the sound and then did something I did not expect at all. He sat down on his haunches in the middle of the path and faced us. The move was so sudden I almost stepped into him. He did not flinch. He planted his front paws square and sat like a dog would sit, huge and steady, his chest rising. He held my eyes and breathed once, a slow push of air that felt like a word without letters. I was certain this was the end of whatever this was. He had brought us as far as he meant to. Now he would slip into the brush, and we would be left with that strange sound and a story we would not be able to tell right. I thought we had reached the end, but he stayed. He stayed, and in staying, he asked. He tipped his muzzle toward the sound, and then back to me, twice, slow and clear, the way you show a child which way to go. He made a short, soft huff that was not threat and not boredom. It was an instruction. My chest tightened in a way that felt like grief and awe at the same time. I understood. He wanted us to go first. Fear and trust fought in me like two hands pulling at one coat. Every sensible part of me said, "Turn around." The other part, the part that had woken up the moment he looked at me on the road, said, "Step." I was shaking, but my foot moved anyway. I stepped past him. His head turned to watch me pass, and for a heartbeat I was close enough to see mud dried into the fur at his elbow and the pale crescent of an old scar. I expected him to rise and block me. He did not. He watched. He let me choose. The sound came again, clearer now, a soft moan, a catch, then a silence that hurt. The bear shifted his weight, but did not stand. My friend came up beside me. My sister wiped her face with the back of her hand and nodded. We moved as a small, uneven line into the darker part of the trees. Every few steps I looked back. The bear was still there, sitting exactly where he had planted himself, a dark, breathing landmark at the opening of the path. When we slowed, he breathed that same short breath, and though it barely reached us, it pressed us forward. When we veered the wrong way, he leaned his head to the other side as if to say, "Not there." When I hesitated at a tangle of brush, he gave a single paw slap to the ground, not loud, not angry, a punctuation mark that pushed my feet. I had never known a wild animal could ask without moving. I felt foolish and honored and afraid in the same second. The path narrowed and dropped. The sound turned into something like a sob, then stopped again, as if whatever made it had run out of voice. I said out loud that we should turn back, that this was too much. Saying it made it sound small. I looked over my shoulder for the bear to rescue me from my own choice by disappearing. He did not. His eyes found mine across the dim space and held me there with a patience that felt older than me, older than all of us. He looked at me like I was his own, and the words were wrong and still true. We pushed through a stiff fringe of saplings, and the smell changed, wet and sour, like old wood and iron, and something hurt. My friend whispered that he could see a shape ahead, low and tangled. The sound came again, raw and thin, and then it quivered itself out. I felt my throat close. I told myself once more that this was as far as we would go, that the bear had given up, that we had no business here. I was sure it was over. But behind us the bear released that quiet breath, the smallest push of air, and I stepped forward because he had asked, and because I understood that the real thing was still a few steps farther inside the dark. We pushed through the saplings and saw it at once. A wind throw had come down sideways and pinned a shape against the earth. The trunk lay twisted with torn roots, and a rag of bark peeled back like a wound. Under the weight, pressed into the wet ferns, a small body shook, white spots on a brown flank, a fawn. Her foreleg was caught under a splintered limb, bent at a wrong angle, not broken through, but trapped. The sound we had heard was not water. It was her voice, thin and spent, catching on each breath. I stopped so fast, my friend ran into my shoulder. My sister made a sound I did not know she could make, a soft, oh, that was more air than word. The bear stood off to our left in the open, not hiding, not closing the distance. He had brought us here, and then he kept himself outside the circle on purpose. He lowered his head and kept his ears loose, not forward, not back. He looked at me like I was his own, and in that look was no hunger and no claim, only a steady asking. The fawn saw us and tried to kick free. The attempt was so small and so brave, it hurt to watch. She struck once with the free hind leg, and then went still, sides racing. In her eyes was a plea that made me cry before I knew I was crying. I wiped my face with the heel of my hand and knelt. The bark under my palm was slick. The trunk did not move. My friend said we needed a lever. My sister said we needed calm hands. I said the only thing that made sense. We will try. The bear shifted his weight and looked into the trees behind us as if to guard the space we had opened. He gave that breathy huff again, low and soft, and the fawn's trembling eased by a fraction, as if some larger animal in her knew that voice. I do not know why that made my chest ache the way it did. I only know it did. I slid my fingers under the smaller branch that pinned her and felt the cold bite of water and rot. It would not lift. It would not even think about lifting. My friend broke a dead limb free and jammed it under the snag like a pry bar. The first shove slipped and bark scraped his knuckles. He swore and shoved again. The wood creaked and flexed but did not give. The fawn's breath chattered. My sister laid her hand on the fawn's neck, barely touching, and whispered nothing words, just a shape of comfort. I told her not to. And then I saw the fawn stop rolling her eyes and fix on that small warmth. It steadied us all. We tried again. I put my shoulder under the lever and pushed until heat flashed in my spine. The branch moved a hair and dropped back. The bear stamped once, soft, not a threat, a period at the end of a sentence. I looked over, ready for fear, and found only patience. He had chosen to stand where he could see our hands. He was not coming closer. He was making himself large enough to keep other things away. I had not known that a wild animal could give a kind of permission. The thought felt like blasphemy and truth at the same time. We set the branch again. My friend pushed. I pushed. My sister slid her fingers farther under the fawn's chest to keep her from scraping when the limb lifted. The bark chewed my shoulder. The wood groaned with a dry sound, and then, all at once, shifted a little. The fawn flinched, and the limb bit down again. I said, "Wait," out loud, but I meant it to the whole forest. The bear answered with that small wind of breath. We tried a third time, and this time I felt the lever seat into a sweet spot. The limb lifted the width of a finger. Then another. Not enough. I put everything I had left into a slow press, and the wood came up the width of a palm. "Now," my sister said, and pulled the fawn's leg free and held it against her chest for a beat to keep it from snapping back. The limb fell into the mud, and the sound was dull and final. The fawn thrashed once, then froze, then panted with her mouth open and her eyes half closed. We let the lever drop and crouched in the wet. The world went quiet in a way that made me aware of my own pulse. I looked up. The bear had not moved. He had not taken a step forward, not one. He watched us with that same steady face, ears loose, head low, body turned a little sideways to be smaller. I waited for the break in the spell, for the moment where instinct would take the fawn and send her into blind kicking. She lay still and shook, and then, by inches, gathered her legs under her. She tried to stand and fell to her chest. She tried again and held, thin and wide-eyed, as if the ground had changed its rules. I thought the bear would go now that we had found what he had brought us to find. I could feel the story ending in my mouth, ready to close on a breath and become something we would tell with our hands later, all wonder and relief. I thought he would turn and fade into the trees, and the night would swallow him. I thought it was over, but he stayed. He stayed where he was and watched us with the patience of a teacher who knows the lesson is not finished. And I understood that, whatever this was, we were still inside it. The fawn panted with her mouth open, ribs fluttering like a small bird under a hand. Mud slicked her flank where the bark had scraped her. She was alive. Her eyes were wide and clear. I said her name without knowing her name. I kept my hands low. My sister held the freed leg and felt for heat. My friend wiped blood and sap from his knuckles and stared like he could not decide whether to laugh or cry. A weight shifted in the trees. The bear stepped closer, one step, then another. The space between us shrank until it felt like the size of a breath. My heart stopped in the way a heart stops when it is too full. I could taste copper. Every lesson I had ever learned shouted inside my head. Do not run. Do not raise your arms. Do not look away. My hands wanted to lift out of their own fear. I made them stay down. The bear came to a place that felt too near, and then he did the strangest thing. He sat. He folded down onto his haunches like he had on the path and set his paws square, chest up, head steady. He did not huff, he did not growl, he did not throw his weight. He watched us the way a parent watches a child finish tying a shoe. I realized I had been holding air and let it go in a broken sound. He glanced at me and then at the fawn, as if to check both ends of one rope. My sister eased the fawn's leg back to the ground and pulled her hands away by inches. The fawn trembled and held. The bear tipped his muzzle and drew a long breath over us. Not a warning, not a claim, just a reading of the air. He turned his head and looked straight into me. In his eyes was a gratitude unlike anything human. It was too clean for pride and too old for thank you. It hit me so hard my vision pulled tight. I pressed my palm against the damp earth to keep from swaying. He looked away before I could look down. He kept his body turned a little sideways, smaller, like he knew his size could break the calm. His ears were loose, his mouth was closed. He made a short, soft chuff aimed at the ground, and the fawn's breathing changed. It slowed by a thread. I felt that thread in my own chest and realized I was matching her without meaning to. My friend whispered that we should back up. The bear cut his eyes to us, not sharp, not begging, and I knew we were not done. The lesson was not only to lift the limb, the lesson was to stay. I did not know how I knew this. I only knew it as the same kind of knowing that had pulled us off the road. We took a half step back and stopped. The bear did not follow. He kept his seat. He watched the trees behind us, then returned to the fawn, as if he were holding a small circle and asking the forest to wait. The night obeyed. Even the wind seemed to thin and listen. The fawn gathered her legs under herself and made a try at standing. She rose a little and then collapsed to her chest. The sound of her bones meeting soil made something inside me flinch. The bear did not twitch. He blinked once, slow, a full close and open, and I felt calm move through me like water through cloth. The fawn tried again. This time she made it a little higher. My sister held her breath. My friend gripped my sleeve until the fabric hurt. The fawn stood on 3 legs and kept the 4th tucked, trembling, and did not fall. The bear leaned forward a finger's worth, and every alarm in me fired again. He stopped himself there, as if he had measured the distance ahead of time. He breathed out, and the breath silvered between us. The fawn shifted her weight and found a balance that would hold for a count you could not count. I wanted to clap and sob and run all at once. I did none of those things. I kept still because he kept still. He lowered his head and touched one paw to the ground in a small, certain press. Not a strike, not a threat, like the kind of nod you make when a child finally gets the knot right. I felt the meaning as a physical thing. I wanted to speak to him and tell him we had only done what anyone would do, and the truth rose in me at the same time that not anyone would have followed him off the road. Both thoughts were true and sat beside each other without fighting. If your heart is holding its breath right now, you understand. Subscribe to the channel. This is where we tell the true things nature shows, and almost no one believes. The fawn took a small step, then another. She tested the bad leg and winced and held. The bear watched, still as a stump, eyes bright and soft. He looked at me again, and in that look was thanks stripped of any need. It shook me more than fear had. It felt like being seen by something that did not need me and chose me anyway. I thought that would be the end of it. I thought he would rise, turn, and disappear into the dark, and we would stand a while and then stumble back to the car with our hands shaking and our mouths full of quiet. I thought the story had closed in a clean line, but the bear stayed where he was, and the night leaned closer, and I understood that the road we had left behind was not the only road with miles still to go. The fawn took a breath that shivered through her whole body and tried to move. She lifted herself a little, tested the bad leg, and wobbled. Her knees trembled as if the ground were tilting under her. She set the hoof down and lifted it again, confused by her own pain. For a heartbeat, I thought she would lurch off and vanish into the brush, and this would be the clean end to a story none of us understood. I thought we would step back and let the forest close around her, like a door. I thought it was finished, but she swayed and sagged to her chest, blowing weak air into the leaves. The bear lowered himself with a slow gravity that changed the shape of the night. He did not crouch as if to spring. He did not bristle. He folded down onto the earth and stretched along the fawn's side at a respectful distance, his body a wall between her and the rest of the dark. The ground seemed to accept his weight like it had been waiting for him. His head came down to his paws. He watched her, not me, not my friend, not my sister. He watched the small life we had pulled from the wood. Every part of me locked. I could not measure the space between us by any rule that made sense. My heart punched and then hung as if it had forgotten what came next. I thought now was when everything would turn, that the wild would reclaim what it had lent us, that teeth would undo the mercy of our hands. I felt the animal logic move through my nerves like fire. The bear did not growl. He did not even huff. He exhaled a warm, careful breath that lifted a few wet hairs on the fawn's neck and then settled. The fawn lifted her head an inch and laid it down again. The bear turned his muzzle toward the dark and away from her, as if telling the forest to look somewhere else. He angled his shoulder to block the small wind. In the cold light that still reached us from the road, I could see steam rise from him in a thin veil. It made a shelter I could feel and not touch. My friend whispered that we should back up. My sister's fingers found my sleeve and held. None of us moved. The picture in front of us was too large for motion. Power and tenderness had laid down together, and I did not have a place in my mind where that could live. I felt the sting of tears in a way that embarrassed me and did not at all. My mouth shook. My hands were steady. Both truths were real at once. The fawn tried again. She tucked her legs under, pushed, and stood half upright in a shaky lean against nothing. The bear lifted his head an inch. No more. He did not reach. He did not test her. He waited the way you wait for someone you love to find their own balance. I could hear the small click of her hooves against a stone under the leaves. I could hear the soft rasp of his breath. Nothing else dared to make a sound. A twig cracked somewhere behind us. All the air left my chest. The bear's ears shifted toward the noise and then eased back. He gave that low, breathy chuff that had become a word without letters, and the night folded in again. I do not know why that calmed me more than any promise could have. It felt like standing in the doorway of a house that has been there longer than you have been alive. He looked at me like I was his own. The glance landed and stayed and changed something in me that I did not know was still changeable. In those eyes I saw no demand, no debt, and no fear. I saw a simple, heavy knowing that did not need my language. In his eyes was a gratitude unlike anything human, stripped of the little polish we give our thanks. It hit low and clean and left me shaking. I thought I should speak. I had the foolish urge to tell him that we had only helped because he asked us to with his waiting and his backward looks, that we were not brave and not special, only pulled along by a thread he held. The words dried out before they reached my tongue. The bear dropped his head again and let the fawn rest her weight on the idea of safety, if not on his body. My friend eased a step to the side to give them space. The bear did not track him. His attention stayed on what mattered most. My sister wiped her face and whispered that the fawn was breathing easier. I listened and heard it too, the change from frantic to hard, from hard to almost steady. It felt like listening to a storm step off your roof and down the street. The fawn took a small step, then paused, then took another. The bad leg skimmed the leaves. She held herself up with a stubborn grace that cut right through me. The bear's paw flexed once, pressing into the mud, a punctuation I could feel in my chest. He lifted his chin and breathed over her again, a soft tide. I found myself matching that tide without meaning to, in and out, as if we were all part of the same animal for a handful of breaths. I waited for the snap in him that would turn this from miracle to mistake. It did not come. He stayed where he was, a sentry made of warmth and patience, while the small life we had freed learned the weight of her own legs again. The silence around us deepened until even my fear had to whisper. The very air felt careful. If I had known this was only the beginning, I would have held that breath a little longer and looked harder at the way he lay there, because nothing in me was ready for what he asked of us next. The fawn steadied herself on 3 legs and, with a small toss of her head, stepped into the brush and vanished the way a candle goes out, quiet and complete. The space she left filled with the soft smell of crushed fern and damp bark. The bear lifted his head, watched the place where she had gone, and then rose. He did not look at us first. He looked into the forest like a man remembering the rest of his work. He took a slow step, then another, and began to move away, deeper, as if the night had just told him what came next. I thought that was the end, a mercy done and dismissed, a story that would close itself while we stood there catching our breath. But he stopped and turned back. He did not hurry. He walked back toward us with his shoulders easy and his head low, as if not to startle us out of our thin courage. He came close enough that I could see the mud dried at the edge of one ear and the pale seam of an old scar under his fur. Then he angled his body, half toward the dark and half toward me, and held there. It felt like a gesture with grammar. Come, not fast, with care. I decided it was a coincidence, a trick of my frightened mind, a pattern I wanted to see because I needed a reason in a place that had none. But he was waiting for us. My friend whispered that we had given enough, that we should be grateful and go. My sister shook her head without looking away from the bear. The bear breathed out, that low-winded chuff we had already learned to hear, and stepped off the small clearing as if drawing a line on the earth. He took 5 paces, stopped, and looked back. This was not the drifting path of an animal losing interest. This was a measured pace, a test. He looked at me like I was his own. We followed. We tried to stay at the same distance we had kept before, but he kept adjusting it, stretching or shrinking the space between us so that it felt exactly held. He walked a short run of moss, paused, and set one paw on a flat stone, holding still until I stepped onto the same stone. He moved around a snarl of fallen limbs and then turned his head and waited until I chose the same gap he had chosen. It was like watching a teacher set problems in a row and check your answers without a word. Then he turned away again, and we stood there, unsure, the old fear rising with the old sense that we had been excused. I thought he would take the out we had just given him and be gone, but the pattern had settled in him. He came back a second time, closer, as if we were slow students. He did not scold, he did not threaten. He simply returned, set his eyes on mine, and held me there until I moved. We walked. The ground began to shape itself into something like a path again, a faint trough where feet or paws had chosen the same line over and over. The smell changed from green to old. I could taste iron at the back of my tongue. Somewhere ahead, a limb tapped against another with a small, regular sound, like breath caught in a pipe. The bear's ears picked and settled. He stepped over a rotting log and paused, not looking back this time, as if he already knew our feet would follow the print of his. He would drift away until the dark put a skin over him, and my chest would tighten the way a child's does when the hand it is holding lets go. Then, Just as the fear of losing him tipped toward panic, he would reappear, walking back at the same slow, deliberate pace, check our faces one by one, and turn again. It happened once. It happened twice. By the third time, I knew it was not chance. He was leading us not once, but again and again, not in a straight line, but in a chain of small invitations. My friend tried to make a joke, and it died in the quiet. My sister said, almost to herself, that the air smelled like wet nails. I felt the same metallic taste and could not place it. The bear paused at a stand of young birch and used his shoulder to brush through them, leaving a faint rattle of papery bark behind him, like a trail of sound. He waited on the other side, eyes shining, patient as a door held open. A night bird lifted and cut a silent curve over us and vanished. The road behind us felt a year away. The lights of our car were a memory. The forest pressed close and familiar and strange. The bear kept the rhythm: go, pause, turn, go, pause, return. Each time he came back, I felt the tug in my chest deepen, like a knot drawing tight to hold. It was not domination, and it was not pity. It was a shared purpose that had not been spoken because it did not belong to words. We came to a shallow swale where water sat black between tufts of grass. He crossed at a narrow place I would have missed. He put his paw on a flat stone and waited so long I thought he had stopped for good. Then he looked back, caught my eyes, and shifted his weight, the smallest cue. I stepped where he had stepped and felt the stone hold under me like an answer. My friend followed. My sister followed. The bear moved on, satisfied, as if the lesson required us to solve it with our feet. I told myself one more time that he would tire of us, that the wild would slip its brief touch and go. The words felt thin even as I thought them. He returned yet again and held us with that unblinking calm that had become the map we could trust. He did not rush us. He did not leave us. He wove us forward with his patience. The smell of old wood grew stronger. The wind seemed to carry the memory of smoke that wasn't there. The ground under us turned from needle-soft to something packed and flat. I could feel the change before I could see it. The bear stopped on the edge of a darker patch between trees and waited, one paw lifted as if at a threshold only he could see. I thought that, finally, this was where he would let us go and fold back into the forest that owned him, that he had used us for all he needed. But he stood there, still and sure, and I understood that we had only reached the next beginning. The ground under our feet turned hard and flat, like a place people had stood a long time ago. The trees opened into a narrow clearing, and there it was, a sagging cabin, roof slouched, windows boarded except for one dull pane that caught a bit of our leftover headlight. The bear stopped at the edge of the open space with one paw lifted, like a person at a threshold. He did not go closer. He tested the air, then angled his body so one eye could hold us while the rest of him faced the dark slants of the cabin. I felt the word "no bloom" in my chest. A bear and a building meant trouble. My friend whispered that we should leave this to whoever owned it, but the place looked abandoned for years. The door hung on one hinge and a padlock dangled broken from a rusted staple. The air smelled of old smoke, damp wood, and something sharp I could not place. The bear took 3 slow steps along the cabin's front, then stopped beneath the unbroken pane and looked up. He tipped his muzzle once. Then he looked at me. A sound lifted from inside, thin and frantic, like something soft beating itself against a wall. Then a scrape, then nothing. My skin prickled. The bear did not move to break or enter. He sat down again, turned slightly away, and fixed his attention on the tree line as if holding the clearing for us. He looked at me like I was his own. My voice felt small when I said I was going in. We approached the door. The bottom edge dragged on the floor, and when I pushed it, Dust lifted in a slow sheet. My sister covered her mouth. My friend used his phone light, and a beam opened a tunnel into the stale dark. Broken chairs, a collapsed shelf, a rusted stove with a fallen pipe. The sound came again, a frantic skitter that turned into a muffled thump. We followed it to the back corner, where a single window sat clouded with grime. There, flattened against the glass, was a young owl, downy still, but big-eyed, one wing tangled in a sag of nylon netting that had drooped from a nail. The nylon bit tight into the feathers. When the bird tried to pull free, the loop cinched. The owl's breath fogged a small circle on the pane. It blinked at us and did not know whether to fear or hope. The bear shifted outside. We heard his weight through the boards. He did not come to the door. He did not demand. He waited like a promise. My friend swore softly and pulled the small knife he keeps for fishing. My sister spoke slowly to the bird the way she had to the fawn, the same nothing words that somehow changed the air. I set a hand on the net to keep it from cutting deeper. The owl turned its face toward me, and I saw my own small shape reflected in those dark coins. My heart clenched. I understood. We were his hands, his help. The first cut freed a single strand. The owl shuddered and stilled. The second cut loosened the loop, and feathers sprang into their right shape. The third cut was close to skin, and my fingers shook hard enough to scrape the glass. Easy, my sister said. To the bird, or to me, I could not tell. Outside, the bear made that breathy chuff. It came through the walls like a push. We worked by touch and the thin phone light. The nylon finally gave with a quiet snap. The owl flared the freed wing, then folded it tight, then breathed hard, beak open. I expected panic, a flail of talons and wild. Instead, the bird stayed pressed to the glass, as if the world on the other side pulled at it like tide. We eased back. The owl lurched, found its feet on the sill, and wobbled. "Window," my friend said, and his voice carried a question. I slid the latch, if it could be called that, and the swollen frame stuck. I put my shoulder under it and pushed. It grudged up a finger's width, then a palm, then a breath more. Cold air poured in, wet and clean. Dust drifted out like old breath leaving a body. The owl lifted, hopped the gap, and rode the air up into the night like a scrap of ash that remembered it was a bird. We watched it find a low branch and sit, head bobbing once, twice, as if the world had shifted under it and then steadied. The bear stood. He rose the way he had on the road, slow and full, and turned his head to follow the owl's line. He did not make a sound. He did not claim. He watched until the owl settled. Then he looked back at us through the open door, and it felt as if the older part of the forest had looked through him. Gratitude lived there, clean and wordless. It hit me so square my knees wanted to bend. We stepped out into the clearing. The air felt different on our faces, used up and made new again. The bear held our gaze for a breath, and then for another, then shifted to the side, making room around the doorway, as if the place still needed its space to breathe. The owl ruffled once and shook itself and held. The clearing was a held note. I thought finally that this was the end. 2 lives, 1 night, a circle closed tighter than any story deserves. I thought he would turn and fade back into the trees, and that the cabin and the clearing would fold up behind him and belong to memory. Now it was surely over, but he did not leave. He took 1 step toward the dark line of the path, checked our faces like a count, and waited as if the truest thing was still a little farther on. He stepped from the edge of the clearing and took the path back the way we had come, unhurried, sure, like a river going home. We followed because there was nothing else our bodies knew to do. He kept the same rhythm as before. Go, pause, turn. Go, pause, return. checking our faces with those backward looks that had become a language. I felt emptied and overfull at once. The night had taken us in and given us back, and I could not tell which part of that was more impossible. The forest thinned by degrees. The smell of damp needles gave way to the faint sweetness of roadside weeds and the colder scent of asphalt. Under the trees, the light from our car had become a memory, but ahead the dark felt a shade lighter, the way a door feels when someone touches the knob from the other side. The bear halted, lifted his head, and breathed a slow, steady breath that brushed the leaves near his muzzle. He looked at me like I was his own. Then he moved on. We broke from the last line of trunks, and there it was, the road, gray as old bone, cutting the night into two quiet halves. Our car sat where we had left it, lights dimmed by distance and mist, the blink of the forgotten turn signal still making its foolish little click, stubborn and human. My legs went weak at the sight. The world of rules rushed back at me and did not fit. The bear walked out first. He stepped onto the faded yellow line and rose to his full height, just as he had at the start, as if the night had folded back to its beginning so we would understand what we had walked through. He was enormous and calm and complete. He turned his face to mine and held my eyes in a way I did not know could happen between two living things that share no words. The air left my chest in a sharp sound and then refused to come back. My breathing stuttered. My knees shook so hard I felt the tremor in my teeth. My eyes filled without my permission. I waited for fear to claim me, and it did, but it came braided with something larger, gratitude that landed so hard it felt like grief. Both lived in me at the same time and did not fight. I lifted my hands a little, palms open, the way you do when you do not know what else to do. He did not flinch. He did not threaten. He simply looked. In those eyes was a gratitude unlike anything human, clean of performance, older than pride. It steadied me and broke me in the same breath. My sister cried in a small, helpless way that had no sound. My friend stood with his mouth open as if the right words would still come if he waited long enough. And then he laughed once, short and broken, because the body has to do something when the heart cannot. The click of the turn signal kept time like a metronome inside a prayer. The bear dropped to all fours and took 3 slow steps along the center line. He stopped, turned that patient head back to us, and made the smallest breathy chuff, the sound we had learned to hear as a sentence. Not goodbye, not stay. Something like it is finished. He looked at me one last time, and I felt that look anchor somewhere under my ribs where the old fear lives and keeps its boxes. The boxes opened and did not close again. He angled toward the ditch, crossed it without a rustle, and slid between 2 young firs with a care that made something in me bow. He did not rush. He did not vanish like a trick. He walked with the same measured mercy he had used all night, so we could keep watching until the dark took him entirely. He was there, and then there was only the place he had been, which held the shape of him, the way water holds the shape of a hand after it lifts away. My breath came back in pieces. My legs trembled like I had stood too long in cold water. My eyes stung and overflowed, and I did not wipe them because it felt wrong to hurry any part of this. I stood in the middle of the road and let the night touch my face the way you let a blessing land. I could not believe what had happened, and I could not disbelieve it either. Both truths sat side by side and made a third thing that had no name. We walked to the car like people who have forgotten how doors work. My friend leaned his head against the roof and laughed that same broken laugh, and then put his fist in his mouth to stop whatever else might come out. My sister pressed her palms to her cheeks and whispered that the owl had found a branch and the fawn had found her feet, and that these were sentences she would never stop saying to herself. I opened the driver's door and the dome light came on, weak and brave. The ridiculous turn signal blinked at me, and I loved it the way you love a scar. I did not start the engine. I could not put a key between myself and what the night had just shown us. I stood with the door open and the cold gathering around my knees and let the road be a church. There are moments that split your life into before and after with no seam you can sew. I felt the cut. It did not hurt the way cuts usually hurt. It hurt the way truth hurts when it refuses to be small. I thought the mind would start doing its old work, tidying, explaining, shrinking the impossible until it fits in a story you can tell over a table. I tried to let it. It would not. The images stayed full size, the bear rising on the line like a question asked by the world itself, the backward looks that held our fear like a hand holds a bird, the fawn breathing in time with us, the owl riding the cold air like a word finally spoken, the bear lying down, not to own, not to claim, but to shelter, the way he waited not once, but again and again until we learned to follow with our feet and not just our hope. Such a thing does not happen, but I saw it with my own eyes. The bear showed me that nature is wiser and kinder than we are. I stood there with my hand on the door and let that sentence be the only thing that moved inside me. It was not a thought. It was a weight. It was a gift I did not deserve and could not pay back. I am not the kind of person who speaks to the dark, but I said thank you to the place where he had gone. The word left my mouth and did not need an answer. The answer was already in the quiet. When I finally slid behind the wheel, my hands were steady in a way they had not been all night. The road ahead looked the same and was not the same. The world outside the headlights was still the world, and it was more. I turned the key. The engine took. The turn signal kept its beat a few more times, and then I shut it off. For a moment, the silence was total. It did not feel empty. It felt held. I am telling you this the only way I know how, with all the clumsy words I have and all the breath I almost lost. I cannot make you believe me, and I do not need to. I am still learning how to believe myself. I keep seeing his eyes and the calm inside them and the way he went when it was time to go. Gratitude keeps rising in me like a tide I cannot turn back, and awe sits beside it like a friend who will not leave. If your heart is full of reverence right now, write. Nature is wiser than us.
In 2007, on a freezing December night in Milwaukee, a police officer on routine patrol made a decision that would quietly echo through the years. He found a newborn, wrapped in a thin towel, shivering on the back steps of an abandoned building. No note, no name, just silence and a heartbeat. Most officers might have waited for backup. He didn't. He scooped the baby into his arms and whispered, "I've got you." What he didn't know was that this tiny life would one day save his. Yes, his. But how? And when? This isn't just another story about duty. It's about destiny, woven through two lives that had no reason to ever cross paths again. But they did, 15 years later, in the most unexpected way. Hit like, subscribe, and let's go. Officer John Bryant had patrolled Milwaukee's 3rd Ward for nearly 15 years. He knew every alley, every flickering streetlight, every face behind every corner store. His mornings started the same: coffee, black, no sugar, and a slow walk to his cruiser as the city yawned itself awake. He wasn't the loud type, more steady than sharp. A man who believed in doing the job right, quietly. He'd seen enough to know when something felt off. But that winter of 2007, nothing seemed unusual. The cold had come early, but crime was low, streets were calm, and John had just filed for vacation time, planning to finally take his wife up to Door County for Christmas. It felt peaceful, predictable, safe. But life has a way of knocking when you're least ready to answer. It was just after 11 p.m. when Officer Bryant noticed something strange. Most nights in December, Milwaukee's back alleys stayed deserted, too cold for wandering. But tonight, a motion sensor behind an old bakery flickered on. Just a flash, then darkness. He slowed the cruiser. Maybe a raccoon, maybe nothing. But something tugged at him. That old instinct. He parked, stepped out, boots crunching over frozen gravel. Then a sound. Barely there. like a whimper, soft and broken. He followed it to the loading dock, flashlight trembling slightly in his hand, not from fear, but from the cold. There, nestled against a rusted metal door, was a bundle. A towel. Moving. Breathing. His breath caught. This wasn't a call on the radio. This was real. A life. And something told him this night wasn't going to end in any report he'd ever filed before. John knelt down, heart thudding louder than the city around him. The towel was damp, too thin for a night this cold. As he peeled it back, his breath caught again, a newborn. No older than a few hours. Purple lips. Tiny fists trembling. And something else. Tucked beside the baby, nearly frozen solid, was a hospital bracelet. No name. Just a date. December 14th. Today. But no nearby hospital had reported a missing child. No calls. No alerts. The alley was silent again, too silent, like it had been waiting. John looked around. No footprints, no voices, just streetlight shadows flickering like ghosts across brick. He radioed for medical, voice tight, then stood still for a long moment, holding that child against his chest. The kind of stillness you feel before a storm. He didn't know why, but it felt like someone had left this baby for him. Specifically him. The hospital took the baby in, labeled her Jane Doe, and started the usual process. But something kept gnawing at John. Protocol said his job was done, but he couldn't walk away. That bracelet, no barcode, no patient ID, just a handwritten number, 82613. It didn't match any hospital records. Against orders, he took a photo and started making calls. Dead ends. Then, during a quiet moment in dispatch, a nurse called him back. Nervous. Quiet. That code. It matches a birth from earlier today. But the mother was listed as deceased. John froze. The room felt colder than the streets outside. What do you mean deceased? He asked. She died during childbirth, the voice whispered. But we never found the baby. That was the moment everything changed. This wasn't just abandonment. It was disappearance. And someone, somewhere, didn't want that baby found. John couldn't sleep. The hospital's cold facts echoed in his head like a siren. A mother who died giving birth, a baby who vanished without a trace, and no official report filed. Something was wrong. Deeply wrong. He returned to the alley the next night, retracing his steps. That's when he noticed it. A surveillance camera. Rusty, forgotten, but still wired. He pulled the footage, hands trembling. At 9:43 p.m., a black sedan appeared. Headlights off. A figure stepped out, carefully placed the baby by the door, then disappeared into the dark. The timestamp? Less than 20 minutes before John arrived. His gut twisted. This wasn't desperation, it was precision. Planned. Executed. He wasn't a savior, he was part of a cover-up. And the worst part? No one seemed to be looking for that car. Or that person. It felt like he was the only one who cared. The only one who knew. 2 days later, John was called into the captain's office. The footage? Gone. Wiped from the station server. No explanation. No backup. Just a cold stare and a warning. Drop it, Bryant. It's above your pay grade. That night, as he drove home, headlights appeared in his rearview mirror, too close, too long. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. One text, stop asking questions. His hands tightened on the wheel. He wasn't imagining this. Someone was watching. Protecting a secret. But why? Why a baby? Why a dead mother with no record of next of kin? Then it hit him, the code. 82613. It wasn't just a hospital tag. It was part of a sealed case number. Classified. Government sealed. He was no longer just a cop. He was a threat to someone. And now, for the first time in his career, John Bryant was scared. 3 days later, John came home to find his front door ajar. No signs of forced entry. Nothing stolen except one thing, the printout of the hospital code. Every other paper untouched. He rushed to his safe for the flash drive with the backup footage was gone. His hand shook as he called dispatch, but the line was dead. Not disconnected. Jammed. Then came the knock. Not at the front, but the back. He grabbed his off-duty weapon, heart pounding, and opened the door to find a young woman. Early 20s. Pale, scared, familiar. In her hand, the hospital bracelet. You don't know me, she whispered, but I think you saved me once. It didn't make sense. The baby? No. It couldn't be. Not yet. Not this grown. But her eyes were the same. For the first time in days, John felt something other than fear. He felt purpose. She was the baby, grown now, adopted by a family in Minnesota. She'd found John after years of searching, through sealed records, anonymous tips, and finally, that hospital code. 82613 wasn't just a case number, it was her mother's badge ID. Her mother hadn't died alone. She was a whistleblower, a nurse who tried to expose an illegal adoption ring and paid the price. Her baby, this girl, was hidden, protected, smuggled out by someone inside the system who trusted only one man to find her, Officer John Bryant. The bracelet was planted. The alley was chosen. He wasn't in the wrong place at the right time, he was the plan. Together, they took their evidence to a retired judge, the only one who still owed John a favor. Investigations reopened. Names came out. People were arrested. For the first time in years, John felt clean, whole. But it wasn't over yet. John retired the following spring. Quietly. No press, no medals. Just a folded uniform, a firm handshake, and a lingering silence. But something inside him had shifted. He still visited the alley once a year, December 14th. Left a single candle. And she? The girl he once cradled in the cold? She became a lawyer. One of the good ones. Fighting for voices no one hears. Their story never made the headlines. But maybe it wasn't meant to. Maybe it was meant for you. Because here's the truth, children disappear every day. And not every child gets found. So the question is, if it were you who found her that night, would you have stopped? Or would you have driven on, telling yourself it's someone else's problem? Think about that. Then hit like, share this story, and tell us in the comments, what would you have done?